Good morning. It is Wednesday, May the 18th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the daily declaration for spiritual warfare, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have Kudos. Determinism is dead. Gun control is illegal. No free lunch. Fossil fuels, and Hondo. All that and more when I get back. Thank you. And now the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare, Biblical Principles to Defeat the Devil for May 18th. I have removed the strength of demonic horsemen. Behold, do not fear the strength of demonic horsemen who come to attack you, for I have removed their strength in the name of my Son, Jesus. You will have my power to render powerless the demonic horsemen who attack you. I have given you my power to bind and rebuke every black horse that would come against you with scarcity and poverty. You will bind and rebuke every red horse that tries to engage you in conflicts and wars with others. You will destroy the power of the pale horse that comes to you with the spirit of death. Through the power of my Son's name, you will be victorious over the attack of Satan with his demonic horsemen. 2 Samuel 8:2-4, Job 39:19, Revelation 6:4-5 and 8. Prayer declaration. Through the power of Jesus Christ, I destroy the strength of any demonic horseman from my life. In the name of Jesus, I bind and rebuke every black horse that would come against me with the spirit of want and poverty. In Jesus' name, I bind and rebuke every red horse that would come against me with the spirit of conflict and war. In the name of Jesus, I bind and rebuke every pale horse that would come against me with the spirit of widespread death. Amen. And that was the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for May the 18th, Biblical Principles to Defeat the Devil. And I always do this every day. The daily prayer is the way I list it, because I am a true conservative, and the true conservative is not ashamed of his existence. I'm a Christian. Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior, and I have no shame about that. Okay, if you are listening to this and you hear me talking about Jesus Christ and you cringe or you wince, then you are not a true Christian. Back in a minute. Thank you. Who is the true conservative? He is religious. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded and asks why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American. Thank you, thank you. What are the 6 biggest mistakes that right-wing talk show hosts make? Number 1, they're neutral. Number 2, they fail to correct their mistakes. Number 3, they demoralize their audiences. Number 4, they contradict themselves. Number 5, they overqualify their statements. Number 6, they think that they have something to prove to the left. Back in a minute. Thank you. Philosophy. As Ayn Rand noted, everything we do is rooted in philosophy. The foundation of our philosophical thinking is the benevolent universe premise. True conservatives know, by the evidence of their senses and the use of their mind, the reality that the universe is benevolent and that success is to be expected. The left pretends that the universe is malevolent and that the failure is to be expected. Furthermore, true conservatives know that if a tree in a forest falls and no one was around to hear it, it still made a sound. That all knowledge is acquired and not innate, and that all moral standards and standards of beauty are universal. Thank you. Politics. All politics comes down to one thing: change. Whether or not to change, how, when, where, and why. All political positions, therefore, relate to one's position on change. The people that make the presumption for change are on the political left, and those who make the presumption for the status quo are on the political right. Everyone who makes the presumption for change is looking, ultimately, for a perfect society. Everyone who makes the presumption for the status quo accepts the imperfectibility of society and agrees to change only when there is an obvious case for change. The true conservative, and only the true conservative, is on the right. Everyone else is on the left. There is no middle and no neutral. The cafeteria is closed. Thank you. Why be a true conservative? In a word, winning. Winning in its broadest sense means confidence. The confidence to win any argument anywhere at any time. Only true conservatives can claim to be confident enough to win all the time, every day. It's easy to win. Quit giving away power. The Republicans in general and conservatives in particular lose because they set themselves up to lose. Conservatives have allowed the left to set the political table for decades. The left has decided that elections should be decided by debating the issues. Then the left goes on to decide what those issues are and who stands on what side of each issue. The left has been able to make sure that the Republicans and conservatives are always on the wrong side of history. To win, the true conservative must fight to own the left's so-called issues. The left claims that there exists left-wing issues and right-wing issues. The left claims women's rights, the environment, civil rights, racial and sexual, labor, and poverty as their issues. If true conservatives allow the left to define political positions, then they will never win. True conservatives must fight for all political constituencies if they hope to survive and thrive. To fight and win these battles, we start with inclusion. The true conservative is the true feminist, environmentalist, civil rights champion, and friend to labor and the poor, because we recognize that all people are part of our civilization and no one has any special rights or power, and need no special rights or power. The left, in contrast, claims women's rights, environmental rights, civil rights, labor rights, and the rights of the poor as separate and distinct from the rest of society. Thank you. So I'm listening to Sean Hannity, and he has Bill O'Reilly. It's, I guess, every Wednesday's Bill O'Reilly Day or whatever. So anyways, they're talking there, and he says something that was absolutely spot on. Credit where credit's due. I criticize Sean Hannity and a lot of the right-wing talk show hosts all the time on my show, but credit where credit's due. And so it was Bill O'Reilly who said that what has to happen, in terms of, he says, the people that are running for office as Republicans need to be solution-oriented. Sean Hannity picked it up from there, and he said, as a matter of fact, I tell every Republican that will listen that the thing that they need to do is make promises to their constituents that they're going to fight their guts out for, and then go to Washington and ignore everything and everyone else and get those things done. That's exactly what I've been saying. Kudos to Sean Hannity. I don't know if he got it from somewhere else or if he figured it out on his own, but thank God he did. I don't care who gets credit as long as we start getting on the right track and understanding that the way things are in Washington is that the GOP wants people that are good fundraisers. That's all they give a damn about. They don't care whether the person actually fulfills their promises or not, so long as they raise funds. So it becomes elect somebody to raise funds to elect somebody to raise funds to elect somebody, and that's it. They end up getting squirreled away on a committee somewhere. You never hear from them again, and all the things that they were talking about when they were in the campaign go by the wayside. So that has to stop. It has to end. Also, the thing that I have said is that politicians no longer make promises. They don't come out and say, I promise to do X, okay, except for Donald Trump. Donald Trump's about the only one that's done it, because the trend is there's something called under-promise, over-deliver. Now, it sounds good. Actually, sounds a little bit on the cynical side. Sounds a little manipulative, and it is. But the point is, if you take that idea to its logical extreme, what does it mean? It means you promise nothing and take credit for everything. And that's what you find with the vast majority of politicians or office holders these days, is every time something good happens, a report comes out, for instance, then they come out and hold a press conference. And they say, yes, look at this report. It's wonderful. It's a thing, and it's because of our efforts that this has happened, and blah, 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 blah. And they just very breezily take credit for it as though, of course we get credit for that. But they don't. They didn't make a promise to do whatever it is that this report claims has been done. Look at the situation with all of the bums that we've got in LA, all of the squatters, all of the trespassers. Now, the mayor will take credit as soon as there's a statistic that comes out that says, let's say, for instance, that squatting and trespassing are down. He'll take credit for that. He'll stand right up and say, well, that's because of my efforts. But no, he doesn't get credit because he doesn't make the promise. And so I've always said, get with your representatives, whoever they are, the people that are running for office, and demand that they make promises. Specific, measurable promises, and then demand that they get those done, and tell them if they don't, I am going to work for your immediate recall. And again, dovetailing with that, we should have government-sponsored recalls. Let the government pay to gather signatures. Let the government pay for the advertising necessary to advertise the recall. Let the government pay for all that. Why should it come out of our pockets? It's a government thing. It's an election thing. The government pays for everything else election oriented. It makes sense that they should pay for recalls as well. But anyways, kudos to Sean Hannity. Kudos to Mr. O'Reilly, who I'm also severely critical of. They both have a lot of flaws, but this is a giant step in the right direction. Kudos, kudos, kudos. Thank you, thank you. So I just came up with something that really blows the lid off this whole homeless thing and really shows what frauds the people on the left are about homelessness. Now, I've always said that the people that are, because all of homelessness, by the way, is the thinking behind it right now in our culture is called determinism. It's a psychological pathology that says or suggests that we have no free will and that we're mere puppets of powers that are beyond our control. That's why the left is always talking about finding a root cause. Root cause, right? Now, let's look at determinism in regards to the people that the left calls homeless, which is very, very interesting. The people that we see with tents and they're pooping in the sidewalk and all that, they're called homeless by the left. Okay, not squatters, not trespassers, not bums, as they should be. Okay, and they should be because we know they have free will. And we know that they're using their free will to engage in activities, usually illegal, but that use up all their money. That's why they don't live in a house. They're not going to spend rent money on the rent if they can spend it on booze or drugs. Okay, so they use their free will to get high and further use their free will to go out and live somewhere where they don't have to pay rent. So they can spend all of their money getting high. Now, according to the left, we got to find out the root cause of homelessness. This is what they say. We got to find the root cause of homelessness. Oh, and by the way, the true homeless, because we have the faux homeless that I've just described, and the true homeless. True homeless are the people that are without a place to live because of powers beyond their control, powers of nature. Okay, acts of God, such as tornadoes, floods, and fire. Recently in Laguna Niguel, many families were burned out of their houses. Their houses just burned up, went up in flames, gone. They are homeless. Now, a couple of things about that. Notice that those people didn't go ahead and, because of the suggestion of the left is that the only reason people live on the street, number one is because the cost of housing is just too high, but also because they're powerless because of their addictions, for instance. And notice, though, that the people that are homeless in Laguna Niguel are not going out and living on the street. They're not pitching tents. They're not doing heroin. They're not smoking meth. They're not doing any of that type of thing. That's what you would expect from the homeless. If you're, when you listen to the left, that these folks, now they got burned out of their house, they're just going to go out onto the street, pitch a tent, and go from there. But they don't. The truly homeless usually end up in a Red Cross shelter and sleeping on a cot in a gymnasium, a high school gymnasium, until they can either get something going through FEMA or they can get family or friends to put them up while they rebuild or whatever it is that they're going to do. Now, what the point where you see the hypocrisy or the lie of determinism is that the left is really, really busy with the people downtown that are pooping their pants and stealing from one another and committing murder and busy getting them shelter. Because determinism says you got to find the root cause. What is the root power that is forcing these people to live like slobs, pigs, whatever? Okay, and according to the left, it's bad. They don't have access to affordable housing. So the left says we're going to go ahead and give them housing. We're going to use money that we stole from the rich to give to these folks here to go ahead and have a place to live. Okay, what about the people in Laguna Niguel? Exactly, nothing. They're more homeless than the people that are living in Skid Row. But there's nobody on the left, not one person on the left is saying, aha, here we have a deterministic situation where these people were kicked out of their house truly by powers beyond their control. We need to go out and take taxpayer money and build them shelters. Nobody on the left is suggesting that. Not one. So we know that determinism is not only a psychological pathology, but it's bullshit. The left doesn't believe in it at all. They like to use it this psychological pathology as a weapon to get what they want, short-term and long-term. So remember that. Determinism is dead. Thank you. So ghost guns, or even any regular type of guns, gun control in itself is illegal. And the reason it's illegal is that the intellectual basis for this is the prevention of crime, more specifically the prevention of gun violence. Anytime the government gets involved in trying to prevent anything, whether it's crime, whether it's poverty, or anything else, it necessarily violates the rights of its citizens. Okay, so we have George Gascon that's asking American Express and other companies to not allow the purchases of ghost guns. Of course, he doesn't seem to understand that there's no such thing as a ghost gun. Ghost gun is just simply a nickname for guns that are purchased piecemeal. They're purchased piecemeal. You get this part of the gun over here, you get that part of the gun over there, and you put it together. And it has no serial number on it. So, but anyways, that's neither here nor there. There was a press conference in which some people that support Mr. Gascon they say that we have to start preventing gun violence. And then they start talking about, of course, banning assault weapons. This, again, another nickname. And so banning the assault weapons is no good, because the government cannot prevent anything. It cannot prevent crime. It cannot prevent poverty. It cannot prevent anything else, hate crimes for that matter, because to do so involves the government violating the rights of its citizens, necessarily violating the rights of its citizens. So it's illegal, and anytime somebody is talking about gun control, the true conservative tells them, sorry, can't be done, it's illegal. Gun control is illegal. Remember that. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. Quote, many businesses with unpopular products or inefficient production find it much easier to curry the favor of a few influential politicians or a government agency than to compete in the open market, unquote. Charles G. Koch. This is actually the essence of crony capitalism. It rarely starts with a corrupt politician looking for a favored business to support, but almost always starts with a deficient business looking for a corrupt politician to aid in its own corruption. Such alliances are easier to form than business savvy is to develop. And often, the use of government and rent-seeking to stifle competition is itself considered its own savvy, and it is confused for real enterprise and competitive advantage. And there's no free lunch. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, the moral case for fossil fuels. And this is the second part of this, the first chapter, and the second part is called Deja Vu. When I was 20 years old, I decided I wanted to write about practical philosophy for a living. Philosophy is the study of the basic principles of clear thinking and moral action. While college philosophy classes all too often present philosophy as an impractical subject that involves endlessly debating skeptical questions. How do you know you exist? How do you know you're not in the matrix? Philosophy is, in fact, an incredibly practical tool. No matter what we're doing in life, whether we're coming up with a business plan or raising children or deciding what to do about fossil fuels, it is always valuable to be able to think clearly about what is right and what is wrong and why. One valuable lesson philosophy taught me is that with any idea, such as the idea we need to get off fossil fuels, we should look at the track record of that idea if it has one. Now, you might think this idea does not have a history because it is a new idea based on the latest science. This is certainly the impression many of our leading intellectuals give. For example, in 2012, I debated Bill McKibben, the world's leading opponent of fossil fuels at Duke University, and he presented his view of our addiction to fossil fuels as cutting edge. We should be grateful for the role that fossil fuel play in creating our world, and equally grateful that scientists now give us ample warning of its new risks, and engineers increasingly provide us with the alternatives that we need. This is the narrative we hear over and over. Fossil fuels were once necessary, but the latest science tells us they're causing an imminent catastrophe unless we stop using them and replace them with cutting-edge renewables. What is rarely mentioned is that 30 years ago, leading experts, including many of today's leading experts, were telling us that fossil fuels were once extinct, but the latest science tells us that they're causing an imminent catastrophe unless we stop using them and replace them with cutting-edge renewables. Take the prediction we hear today that we will soon run out of fossil fuels, particularly oil, because they are non-renewable. This prediction was made over and over by some of the most prestigious thinkers of the 70s, who assured us that their predictions were backed by the best science. In 1972, the international think tank The Club of Rome released a multi-million copy selling book, The Limits to Growth, which declared that its state-of-the-art computer models had demonstrated that we would run out of oil by 1992 and natural gas by 1993. And, for good measure, gold, mercury, silver, tin, zinc, and lead by 1993 at the latest. The leading resource theorist of the time was ecologist Paul Ehrlich, who was so popular and prestigious that Johnny Carson invited him onto his show over a dozen times. In 1971, he said, by the year 2000, the United Kingdom will simply be a small group of impoverished islands inhabited by some 70 million hungry people. And in 1974, he wrote, America's economic joyride is coming to an end. There will be no more cheap, abundant energy, no more cheap, abundant food. Another catastrophic prediction we hear today is that pollution from fossil fuels will make our environment more and more hazardous to our health. Hence, we need to stop using dirty fossil fuels. This prediction was also made many times in the 70s, with many assurances that these predictions were backed by the best science. Life magazine reported in January 1970 that because of particles emitted in the air by burning fossil fuels, scientists have solid experimental and theoretical evidence to support the following predictions. In a decade, urban dwellers will have to wear gas masks to survive air pollution. By 1985, air pollution will have reduced the amount of sunlight reaching the earth by 1/2. To quote Paul Ehrlich again, as he may have been the most influential public intellectual of the decade and is still a prestigious professor of ecology at Stanford University, air pollution is certainly going to take hundreds of thousands of lives in the next few years alone, he said in 1970. And then there's a prediction we hear most today, the supposedly scientifically indisputable claim that CO2 emissions from fossil fuels will cause a true climate catastrophe within a couple of decades. Reading back in time, I saw that many of the leaders who make that prediction now had, decades ago, predicted that we'd be living in catastrophe today. Here's a 1986 news story about a prediction by James Hansen, the most influential climate scientist in the world over the last 30 years. Dr. James E. Hansen of the Goddard Space Flight Center's Institute for Space Studies and Research said by his institute showed that because of the greenhouse effect, the results when gases prevent heat from escaping the Earth's atmosphere, global temperatures would rise early in the next century to well above any level experienced in the past 100,000 years. Average global temperatures would rise by 1/2 a degree to 1 degree Fahrenheit from 1990 to 2000 if current trends are unchanged, according to Dr. Hansen's findings. Dr. Hansen said the global temperature would rise by another 2 to 4 degrees in the following decade. Bill McKibben, when he told Duke students in 2012 that we were on the verge of drastic warming, neglected to mention the results of his decades-old claims, such as this one in 1989. The choice of doing nothing, of continuing to burn ever more oil and coal, is not a choice. In other words, it will lead us, if not straight to hell, then straight to a place with a similar temperature. And a few more decades of ungoverned fossil fuel use, and we burn up, to put it bluntly. John Holdren, a protege of Paul Ehrlich, who serves as a science advisor to President Barack Obama, had a particularly dire prediction. According to Ehrlich in 1986, as University of California physicist John Holdren has said, it is possible that carbon dioxide climate-induced famines could kill as many as 1 billion people before the year 2020. Just as the media today tell us these catastrophic predictions are a matter of scientific consensus, so did the media of the 1980s. For example, on the issue of catastrophic climate change, by early 1989, the popular media were declaring that all scientists agreed that warming was real and catastrophic in its potential, a 1992 study reported. If all the predicted catastrophes, depletion, pollution, climate change had occurred as the thought leaders said they would, the world of today would be much, much worse than the world of the 70s. In the 70s, Ehrlich went as far as to say of the overall devastation ahead, if I were a gambler, I would take even money that England will not exist in the year 2000. And these were not idle predictions. The coming fossil fuel catastrophe was so bad, these leading experts said that we needed dramatic restrictions on fossil fuel energy use. Ehrlich wrote, except in special circumstances, all construction of power generating facilities should cease immediately, and power companies should be forbidden to encourage people to use more power. Power is much too cheap. It should certainly be made more expensive and perhaps rationed in order to reduce its frivolous use. In 1977, Amory Lovins, widely considered the leading energy thinker of the 70s for his criticisms of fossil fuels and nuclear power and his support of solar power and reduced energy use, explained that we already used too much energy. And in particular, the kind of energy we needed was electricity, the foundation of the digital information revolution. We don't need any more big electric generating stations. We already have about twice as much electricity as we can use to advantage. In 1998, Bill McKibben endorsed a scenario of outlawing 60% of fossil fuel use to slow catastrophic climate change, even though that would mean, in his words, that each human being would get to produce 1.69 metric tons of carbon dioxide annually, which would allow you to drive an average American car 9 miles a day. By the time the population increased to 8.5 billion in 2025, you'd be down to 6 miles a day. If you carpooled, you'd have about 3 pounds of CO2 left in your daily ration, enough to run a highly efficient refrigerator. Forget your computer, your TV, your stereo, your stove, your dishwasher, your water heater, your microwave, your water pump, your clock. Forget your light bulbs, compact fluorescent or not. All of these thinkers today still advocate similar policies today. In fact, today Bill McKibben endorses a 95% ban on fossil fuel use, 8 times as severe as the scenario described above. And all of them are extremely prestigious. Since making these predictions, John Holdren has become science advisor to President Obama. Bill McKibben is called the nation's leading environmentalist, and more than anyone, led opposition to the Keystone XL pipeline. And Paul Ehrlich is still arguably the most influential ecological thinker in the world. Energy historian Robert Bradley Jr. chronicles his accolades. Ehrlich held an endowed chair as the Bing Professor of Population Studies in the Biology Department at Stanford and was elected president of the American Institute of Biological Sciences. He was elected to the National Academy of Sciences and received many awards and prizes, including the inaugural prize of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences for Science in the Service of Humanity, the MacArthur Genius Award, the Volvo Environmental Prize, the World Ecology Medal from the International Center for Tropical Ecology and the International Ecology Institute Prize. He also received what is hyped as the equivalent of the Nobel Prize in a field where it is not awarded, the Crawford Prize in Population Biology and the Conservation of Biological Diversity. Thus, today's leading thinkers and leading ideas about fossil fuels have a decades-long track record, and given that they are calling for the abolition of our most popular form of energy, it would be irresponsible not to look at how reality is compared to their predictions. Of course, predictions on a societal or global level can never be exact, but they need to be somewhere near the truth. So what happened? 2 things. Instead of following the leading advice and restricting the use of fossil fuels, people around the world nearly doubled their use of fossil fuels. which allegedly should have led to an epic disaster. Rather, it led to an epic improvement in human life across the board. From the 1970s to the present, fossil fuels have overwhelmingly been the fuel of choice, particularly for the developing countries. In the United States, between 1980 and 2012, the consumption of oil increased 8.7%. The consumption of natural gas increased 28.3%, and the consumption of coal increased 12.6%. During that time period, the world overall increased fossil fuel usage far more than we did. Today, the world uses 39% more oil, 107% more coal, and 131% more natural gas than it did in 1980. This wasn't supposed to happen. The anti-fossil fuel experts had predicted that this would be not only deadly, but unnecessary due to the cutting-edge promise of solar and wind. Sound familiar? Then as now, environmental leaders were arguing that renewable energy combined with conservation, using less energy, was a viable replacement for fossil fuels. Amory Lovins wrote in 1976, recent research suggests that a largely or wholly solar economy can be constructed in the United States with straightforward soft technologies that are now demonstrated and now economic or nearly economic. Lovins was a sensation, and around the globe, governments gave solar companies billions of dollars in the hope that they would be able to generate cheap, plentiful, reliable energy. But as this did not happen. Solar and wind are a minuscule portion of the world energy use, and even that is misleading because fossil fuel energy is reliable, whereas solar and wind aren't. While energy from, say, coal is available on demand, so you can keep a refrigerator or respirator or whatever you need it, solar energy is available only when the sun shines and the clouds cooperate, which means it can only work if it's combined with a reliable source of energy such as coal, gas, nuclear, or hydro. Why did fossil fuel energy outcompete renewable energy? Not just for existing energy production, but for most new energy production. This trend is too consistent across too many countries to be ignored. The answer is simply that renewable energy couldn't meet those countries' energy needs, though fossil fuels could. While many countries wanted solar and wind, and in fact used a lot of their citizens' money to prop up solar and wind companies, no one could figure out a cost-effective, scalable process to take sunlight and wind, which are dilute and intermittent forms of energy, and turn them into cheap, plentiful, reliable power. So despite the warnings of leading experts, people around the world nearly doubled their use of fossil fuels. According to the predictions of the most popular experts who assured us that their conclusions reflected the best science, this should have led to utter catastrophe. But the result was one of the greatest ever improvements in human life. This book is about morality, about right and wrong. To me, the question of what to do about fossil fuels and any other moral issue comes down to what will promote human life, what will promote human flourishing, realizing the full potential of life. Colloquially, how do we maximize the years in our life and the life in our years? When we look at the recent past, the past was supposed to be so disastrous. We should look at flourishing, and that, of course, includes the quality or lack thereof of our environment. And there's an incredibly strong correlation between fossil fuel use and life expectancy, and between fossil fuel use and income, particularly in the rapidly developing parts of the world. There's no perfect measure of flourishing, but one really good measure is life expectancy. The average number of years in the life of a human being, Another good one, for less obvious reasons, is average income. This is valuable because while in a sense money can't buy happiness, it gives us resources and therefore time and opportunity to pursue our happiness. It's hard to be happy when you don't know where your next meal is coming from. The more opportunity you have to do what you want with your time, the more opportunity you have to be happy. Consider the fate of two countries that have been responsible for a great deal of the increase in fossil fuel use, China and India. In each country, both coal and oil use increased by at least a factor of 5, producing nearly all of their energy. The story is clear. Both life expectancy and income increased rapidly. meaning that life got better for billions of people in just a few decades. For example, the infant mortality rate has plummeted in both countries. In China by 70%, which translates to 66 more children living per 1,000 births. India has experienced a similar decrease of 58%. Not only in China and India, but around the world, hundreds of millions of individuals in industrializing countries have gotten their first light bulb, their first refrigerator, their first decent paying job, their first year with a clean drinking water or a full stomach. To take one particularly wonderful statistic, global malnutrition and undernourishment have plummeted by 39% and 40% respectively since 1990. That means in a world with a growing population, billions of people are better fed than they would have been just a few decades ago. While there's plenty to criticize in how certain governments have handled industrialization, the big picture effect has been amazingly positive so far. Ours is a world that was not supposed to be possible. And that's the end of the second part of chapter 1. This is shaping up to be an absolutely outstanding book. Read it, read it, read it, read it. And you're reading this for your own, this is a book that's for your own psyche. We get bombarded by the left with propaganda every day about dirty fossil fuels, blah, 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 blah. And it's easy at some point to say, well, maybe they're right. Maybe they're right. Maybe, oil looks kind of dirty. I wouldn't want to have it on my kitchen table, right? And natural gas smells funny, and coal, that also looks kind of dirty. So maybe they got a point here, right? So when you read a book like this is a book that can set you straight. This is not, the things that you're reading in this book are not to be used against lefties. The lefties aren't going to pay attention. They don't care about stats. They don't care about logic. They don't care about any of that. They are into using tricks and various tricks and tools and techniques to get you to give up the fight. Okay? And so that's completely separate. This book is for you to read so that you understand that your support of fossil fuels is environmentally sound. And a key part of it is what he said in this chapter is about human beings, human longevity, human thriving. And that's the true environmentalist, the true conservative knows that human beings come first. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, chapter 5 of Hondo. Hondo Lane walked the line back into the willows and let the horse plunge his dark muzzle into the cold, clear water of the stream. Day had come, but the sun was obscured behind towering masses of thunderheads. The morning was cool. There was no wind. 2 days out of Angelo's ranch, and he had just reached the bank of Little Dutch Creek. At this rate, he would be 4 days getting to the post, if he got there at all. Twice on the first day, he had cut the trail sign of small Apache bands. Yesterday, after swinging wide to avoid further meetings, he had narrowly escaped being seen on a grassy hillside. Luckily, he had left the line back in an arroyo over the ridge, so he flattened out in the grass and lay unmoving and so unseen. Thunder rumbled like the booming of far-off guns. Cumulus had darkened. Hondo flattened beside the stream, drank, then filled his canteen. Sam had crossed the stream and was drinking there. His head came up sharply, muzzle dripping water. Hondo caught the lineback's nostrils and held them. 2 mescaleros came up the creek, one of them riding a big chestnut horse with a U.S. brand. The other wore a lieutenant's blue coat, now dusty and darkly stained. Not 12 feet away they stopped. Hondo slid his Bowie knife into his hand. A gun would have been more certain, but how far away were the other Indians? He took a quick, sure step. The mescaleros turned like cats, and he lunged. The nearest Indian struck down bare-handed at the knife blade. Too late. The blade went in hard, and Lane jerked it across and free. The mescalero grabbed his wrist and pulled Hondo down, dying under him. Jerking free, Hondo rolled over and then he saw that the other Indian was down. Over him, humped in an awful fury, was Sam. The big dog had sprung from close up, and the startled Apache had no chance with 90 pounds of snarling, driving fury on top of him. Lane scrambled to his feet and put a hand on the dog. "All right, Sam." Reluctantly, the dog let go. There was a long scratch on his ribs. Ears pricked, still growling. He walked stiff-legged around the dying Indian, and then at another word from Hondo, he turned and went into the cold water, lying down. Lane peeled the bridle and blanket from the horse with the army brand and turned it loose. There was a bloody scratch on the flank, not yet a day old. The mescalero with the officer's coat had something else. Hondo stooped and pulled it from the pocket, the guidon of Company C, trampled, dusty, and bloody. He stepped into the leather and moved off riding with caution. There was a faint stirring in the grass now, and there was a smell of dampness in the air. Sam moved far out on the flank, trotting with his head up, knowing the danger. Then he saw the buzzards. They were low down over a distant hill. He put the line back into a trot, and then, turning in the saddle, he looked back. Only the long grass moved. Only the distant hills lined the horizon. He inhaled deeply, liking the cool, fresh air. He rode down into the long valley down which the Apaches had come. At least 80 warriors, likely more. Davis had been outnumbered 2-1. He puckered his brow. The Indians had been moving right along, not like men going into battle. First thing he saw was a dead pony. He drew up, scanning the ground. He counted 9 more, moved ahead, and saw too many to count. There was blood on the grass where men had fallen. He saw a spot of white. It was a dead trooper, stripped and mutilated. Swinging right into the hills, he saw several brass cartridge cases. 2, 3 men here. He saw it then, ambush. Not by the Indians, but by Lieutenant Davis and Company C, and they had hit hard on the moving Apaches. At the opposite hill toward which the Apaches had fled for shelter, he saw more horses and several spots of white. Atop the hill, he drew up, looking around. He saw that all that remained of Company C, the naked bodies of the dead, fallen in their blood and their glory as fighting men should. Some were scalped, many were not. Lieutenant Davis had been shot 3 times, twice through the body and then a finishing shot through the head. His body was not mutilated. Neither was that of Big Clanahan lying close by. They had died together, the lieutenant and the malcontent. Nearby lay a broken whiskey bottle. Hondo Lane rolled a smoke and lit it, knowing what had happened here. That bottle had belonged to Davis, and at the end he must have given it to Clanahan. Hondo could picture the scene, the lieutenant giving the bottle to the man he had several times sent to the guardhouse for drunken brawling. But a man who died well beside an officer he understood. He drew deep on the cigarette. This was no place to stop, yet he hesitated, looking for the one man who should be here. He saw him then, some 30 yards away. Old Pete Britton had outlasted them all. That was evident from the scattered shells around his body. Despite the Apache's need for weapons, the 2 rifles he had used were not taken. His body was unmutilated. They were signs of respect by the Apaches to a fighting man. Judging by the signs, the old man must have held out at least an hour longer than the others. On his hard old face, there was a taunting, wolfish grin. He had defeated his ancient fears of loneliness, sickness, and poverty. Only when he was once more in the saddle did he see the fleck of white on the blade of bare grass. It was a thick letter addressed to Mrs. Martha Davis. Turning down the valley, he saw the rest of the story. The ambush had worked, a decisive blow, if not a conclusive victory. And then the Mimbreños had come up from behind, the unknown factor. Briefly, he scouted around, reading the last grim details of the story, written plainly here. Then he started the line back down the long valley at a steady trot. So it had started then, and with a crashing victory for the Apaches. Yet a victory that had cost them much. The Apaches carried off their dead and wounded, but there were bloodstains on the grass, and many of them marked where men had died. He rubbed the scrabble of beard on his jaws, staring bleakly into the west. He felt the stir of wind upon his neck, The grass bent around him, and the lineback's mane streamed away, and with the wind came a few large scattered drops of rain. Turning the slap of rain against his hard cheeks, he dug into the bedroll for his slicker. When he had it on, he kept to low ground off the hills where lightning would strike. And then came the wind and the rain. It struck with a solid blow. There was an instant of pause, then the downpour. Thunder roared in the distance. Then lightning snapped at the ridge to his right, and there was a smell of brimstone and charred grass. The lineback moved out, wanting to run, and he let it go. The rain roared down, and the wind swept it along the grass. In a matter of minutes, there was a trickle of brown water down the valley, then a widening rush. He moved the horse to a ground a few feet higher and pushed on. Suddenly, an arroyo cut the ground across before him. Already the sand was damp, and there was a trickle of water. He hesitated, hearing the roar of the water coming downstream, knowing that wall of rolling water could be upon him in seconds. Then he gambled. He put the line back down the bank and slapped him hard on the hip. The animal, startled, leapt from under him, and then, snorting in terror, was running, belly down across the arroyo. Almost in the middle he saw the wall of water upstream, bearing great logs on its crest. Bank to bank, the rolling wall of brown water rushed at him, and he slapped spurs to the line back, and the horse gave a pain-maddening lunge and reached the bank. Its hoofs slipped in the clay and then caught, and with two great bounds the horse was up and away from the water. "Good boy," Hondo panted the horse's shoulder. "You'll do to take along." The horse tossed his head impatiently, and they pushed on. Rain pelted them. The sod turned soggy underfoot. Waves of wind washed over them, and great whips of lightning lashed the darkened hills. Stones glistened like gems, and the gray veil of the rain strained out of the distance and left nothing but the wet and roaring world which they moved, man and horse, joined now before the common terror of the storm. A dozen times he turned aside, working away from torrents of white water roaring down arroyos. Once he saw a great cottonwood uprooted and lying upon its side. He saw tall grass flattened to the ground, and hail beat upon them, then passed. There was no stopping, for there was no place to stop. He rode on, half stunned by the driving fury of the storm, remembering the house and the basin and wondering how Angie fared. She should have been a man. Should have had a man. It was not good for a woman to live alone, nor a man. And that boy, the lad, needed a father. From a low place in the hills, his eye caught a glistening something, and he reined over and rode nearer. It was a low roof, a stone-faced dugout in the side of a hill. He rode the horse down and, swinging down, opened the door. It was roomy and dry within. It was a struggle to get the horse through the door, but he made it. At the back of the dugout, there was a dirt-floored cave where there was a hitch rail and a trough. He shucked out of his slicker and took the wood from a pile of mesquite roots and built a fire in the crude fireplace. There was a little grain left in the bag brought from Angie's, and he hung a feed bag on the horse, then wiped him as dry as possible. The fire blazed up, the room grew warm. Hondo barred the door and fixed a meal, then lay down on the boards of the bunk and dozed. The firelight played on his face, the rain roared and pounded on the roof overhead. What kind of man could leave a woman like that in Apache country? His eyes were suddenly wide open, and he was angry thinking about it. She was all woman, that one, and a person, a real person. Somewhere along the tangled trail of his thoughts, he dropped off and slept. And while he slept, the rain roared on. Tracks were washed out, and the bodies of the silent men of Company C laid wide-eyed to the rain and bare-chested to the wind. But the blood and the dust washed away, and the stark features of Lieutenant Davis stared at the sky, where the lightning played and the fury of the storm worried its way out. Lieutenant Creighton C. Davis, graduate of West Point, veteran of the Civil War and the Indian Wars, darling of Richmond dance floors, hero of a Washington romance, dead now in the long grass on a lonely hill west of everything. The fire smoldered and blinked its light away, finding no fuel, and in the cold sundown, Hondo Lane opened his eyes and looked up at the roof, then swung his feet down. The rain was gone. There was no wind. Out there was all silent. He opened the door and stepped out. Broken clouds floated above, and in the far-off west the storm rolled and grumbled like a drunken sergeant in his sleep. Lane let out his horse and tightened the cinch, then stepped into the saddle again and followed westward after the storm. And the storm clouds were topped with fire. Spears of crimson shot out, piercing the tall sky, and a star appeared. It was cool now and still. The miles fell behind. In the distance there was faint smoke. Then came the rain-washed walls of the village and the rain-darkened parade ground, the sutler's store, and the home of the army west of the Rio Grande. Hondo Lane pulled his hat brim lower and started the line back down the slope. At least, he thought, this is still here. But behind this thought there was the memory of a quiet-faced woman and a child, of a house beside a stream, and of a woman moving in the house while he slept. He shifted restlessly in the saddle and swore at the horse to cover his feeling and his wonder at it. And that's the end of Chapter 5 from the book by Louis L'Amour called Hondo. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers, and reminding you to listen to the John and Ken Show on KFI AM 640, Monday through Friday from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. Pacific Time. Also, KFI needs to bring back Brian Suits and his show, The Dark Secret Place. Hashtag bring back Brian Suits. Until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.